Thanks, Andrea. So yes, this is, as you know, the second session of training module 2. On the last session, we were discussing about data collection and intersectional analysis of data, and we're working on Miro about this topic. And today's session is focusing on the GEP implementation. And for today's session, we have an invited trainer. In this case, it's Maxime. He's a consultant and trainer at Yellow Window, and Yellow Window is one of the partners of AgriGEP project that is a sister project of Supporter. And Maxime also is a senior researcher and lecturer at the Sciences Po, this Paris University. So AgriGEP is, as we mentioned, is a sister project of Supporter that also is including in its consortium widening countries, but the focus of AgriGEP is in agriculture and life science. So there are also 6 research performing organizations, and they are also working on having gender equality plans that are inclusive and also targeted to the sector specific of agriculture and life science. So I will give now the floor to Maxime. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Eugenia. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be your guest today. I hope, because I noticed some slight delay in the picture during Eugenia's introduction, so hopefully we won't have any connection trouble. If there is anything major from my side, you just make a sign on the chat, and we will try to solve it. So no need to self-introduce. I do not need to add anything about AgriGEP. Maybe just the fact that we are happy that we can build up this collaboration today, and that from experience, it's always good to mix a little bit perspective from, or to confront perspective from different similar projects, because there is a lot of things we have in common, a lot of challenges we face which are pretty similar, especially when as it is the case in Supporter and AgriGEP, we are focusing on so-called widening countries, mostly located in Central Eastern and South East Europe, and that creates also a number of challenges, but also of opportunities for mutual learning. So hopefully there will be also a layer of mutual learning in today's session. So we'll start sharing my presentation. And I thank in advance also Nathalie for helping me on part of it. Okay, do you see it well on full screen? Yes, can we start? Okay, good. I'm still struggling with some not well located boxes of Zoom, but here we go. Okay, so when we designed together this session, we were thinking of course, different potential focus and how to angle this session this morning. And there are 2 levels that were important to us and hopefully to you as well with regard to GEP implementation. One is to convey to you what we learned through different similar projects implementing gender equality plans in terms of how to build a strategic approach, how to be wise in the way you define your objective, in the way you mobilize stakeholders and engage with them on a daily basis to get this plan implemented, and how also you face potential resistance, bottleneck, and occasionally go around them rather than stubbornly trying to convince people or part of the institution if they don't want to be convinced. So we will focus on that, and then we will focus more specifically on your grounding actions related to addressing gender-based violence, also through awareness raising, because this is one of the fields that pose specific challenges, notably in institutions like yours, which are devoted to sport education. And we thought it will be like a good example of how things can be done strategically and comprehensively, not like limiting yourself to isolated actions. So that's all for the introduction. So when we think, we talk of a step-by-step approach, probably you are quite familiar by now with the Gender Equality in Academia and Research online tool that was designed by EIGE to support academic institutions to implement their GEP. We have a 6-step approach altogether for GEP implementation. That include notably analyzing and assessing the state of play, collecting data. You have been already discussing that lately. Designing your plan, if you are in the project, is because either you had one or because you built a new one. So that's supposed to be done, obviously. And we will focus on the 2 green line here, which is implementing the gender equality plan, of course, but also monitoring progress, because actually it's not that much of a separate step as it is shown here. It is an integral part of GEP implementation. You can't possibly implement if you do not follow up what you're doing, and if you are not trying to determine whether you are making an impact or not. And then there is this next step, which is what comes next, or what will come after the GEP that you have been implementing. But when it comes to specifically implementation, it's quite striking to see that we usually have less guidance, as if everything was set, and then, well, go on, implement. That's not like that. And I'm sure you know it's not like that. You realize on everyday basis that it's far more complicated, that you may have difficulties to mobilize your stakeholders, that you may face some resistances, that you may be short of resources, or you may just be lost in implementation. So there are a few principles that can help us and guide us throughout the process of implementing a gender equality plan or strategy. And it's worth to remind them, because they should be with us all along the process and they help us to implement wisely and effectively. The first principle is, of course, participation. You need a certain number of people to be involved, not only at the design stage, as you probably did, but also for implementation. Often, actual implementation of your grounding action is not between your hands, is between someone else's hands, someone in human resource department, in information or institutional intelligence department, in financial departments, communication services, and so on and so forth. So those people, they need to be engaged with at different points, perhaps not always, but for the implementation of specific action. A second principle is inclusiveness. And this is something that we can easily lose from sight. Inclusiveness is not just that people participate, is that different type of people and different type of group within your organization, within your university, participate somehow in implementing the plan. Students, academics, administrative or technical staff, people with different type of contracts, long-term, short-term, people who come possibly from outside your organization, invited scholars, for instance, or foreign students in exchange. But also people with different level of potential exposure to inequalities and discrimination due to their origin, abilities, age, whatever. So being inclusive to the greatest possible extent is also a principle. What we mean by an holistic view is something very important for today's session. A gender equality plan is not just a few actions you focus on and you prioritize. It's a broader view. You need to zoom in and you need to zoom out sometimes to relate what you're doing to what others are doing within the institution to implement the GEP. So it's to have a view on the different fields which are to be covered as per the EU model of gender equality plans that you know, work-life balance and organizational culture, gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and different gender in research and teaching, and access to decision-making, and so on and so forth. That's the holistic view. Being flexible is very important too. It means that you may fail, that there is an action that may have been carefully designed and be difficult to implement in practice. Will you reiterate effort for 2 or 3 years to get it implemented? Or will you think it again and change a little bit the course so that it works? That's what is meant by flexibility. Making change visible is another important principle. A lot of changes in relation to gender equality and inclusiveness in universities take time. It may take far longer than the time span of your plan. That's perfectly logical. But it's important in the meantime to show your institution that something is happening, not only through communication or awareness raising, but showing that, look, we tried to do this, and this brought intermediate changes that we think are important to show or to showcase. And also it's important that people see that you yourself are committed to the plan, that you are actively doing things and communicating about it. And of course, sustainability, no need to explain that the more you can ground your action into the daily functioning of your university, the more sustainable it will be. And sustainability means also paying attention to the resources, human, technical, knowledge-based, or financial, that you commit to each action. So it's just a reminder, but it's important to have this in view. There are few things that we would like also to share with you this morning, trying not to be overwhelming, but the implementation is, of course, a very important moment. Things that we have learned collectively by implementing this kind of plans, and notably in context like widening countries or in specific disciplinary areas where we might encounter specific challenges. We know, for instance, that implementing a GEP can be exposed to policy and leadership change. You may have support at the beginning and not in the middle. The support can fade. They are usually led by a group of people who have not full agency within the organization. You know your own university, but you might not know everything of how it works. You might know a faculty and not another, for instance. And usually the group of people who are on a daily basis actively contributing to the GEP implementation, there are just a few people, just as you are few in this room today. So that is like a challenge per se. Something we learned collectively as well is you will have window of opportunity, either because you identify the right one and you use it, or because you create it yourself. A window of opportunity for change is not just, we adopted the GEP, we will implement it, because it can just stay dead letters, as we know for any policy. But it is something different. It is when you connect with broader agenda of your leadership and your university, or because there is a big change happening at the moment in your in the organization of universities in your country, a new law, for instance, about universities. These are windows of opportunity. You can sneak your gender equality plan agenda into this context. But first you have to see that this is happening. You have to know about it. And we don't always know about everything. But when we do, we realize that the window of opportunity for change is narrow. You have to shot through it before it closes, before this context, which is favorable to change, is over. So that's also important. And we know also that gender equality is not whatever agenda. It's not like just digital transformation, for instance. You know, it is something which is can be met with significant amount of resistance or contention. People do not understand what gender equality is to the same extent, nor the same way. So there is a lot of discussion to be carried out. And there may be also some competing agendas that will alter your gender equality effort course because people consider that other things might be more important. In terms of the most pressing challenge, we know a certain number of things too. We know that it's not because you have a plan that it will survive itself. Your grounding action might not be grounded at the end. They have the potential to be, but maybe if there is no resource to back them up after the supporter project is over, they won't be institutionalized. So it won't be sustainable. There might be also a problem of sustainability if all the changes are relying just upon you in this room this morning. That cannot be. That's why you need to involve more people. And what is perhaps more important for today's session are two things. There are challenges to gender equality plans which can arise from a particular disciplinary area, like sport education, because we do not have the same research or teaching culture everywhere in life science, in space research, in computer sciences, or in sport education. There are variations. We all believe in merit, for instance, but perhaps if you are in a field which is training coaches or future athletes, competition will be more important. And the notion of merit will be sharper, will be more difficult to discuss. What is merit about? Is this just like about using the best way your privileges, or really bringing a common ground to start from to people so that they can express their true merit, not their privileges? So that we know can be important. And historical legacy is also something that we have to deal with always, everywhere, north, east, west, or south of Europe, the same, but the legacies are not the same. So if I give the example of Central Eastern European countries, which have a long experience of state socialism, although it's long ago, there is still a strong belief in individual merit versus equalitarianism, which is understandable, or versus social engineering to create equal society, which is fictitious as it was created decades ago by state socialism. So this heritage is also something you have to deal openly with. So I don't know if you have, maybe you can just like raise your hand or drop it into the chat in a minute, but if you're thinking of those specific obstacles, either due to your discipline, sport education, or to your country context, what comes to your mind? What have you realized is something which is very specific to you in terms of an obstacle to implementing a gender equality plan? Can you share, maybe a few of you can share about this? When I'm speaking about history, when I'm speaking about ethos or culture in a particular discipline, for instance, about merit or competition, do you have any example of that?
Well, for example, do you hear me? Susanna from Charles University.
Yes.
So I have something in my mind. The thing is that for gender equality, it's Czech Republic very specific, because I would say compared to Western countries, we were relatively forward thinking in our history. So we were one of the first countries in Europe who had like votes for women's, and during the communist area and period, that was very much supportive for the women. So early childcare, the rights for women, and so on. But generally speaking, the situation kind of really slowed down with the new regime and with the democracy. So it's very specific for us. And somehow we are kind of used to from regulation from higher level, not from down. So in our country, it doesn't happen any change from down, but it changed always from up level. If you know what I mean.
You're muted.
Yeah, it was by mistake. Yeah, I see two things. Indeed, an historical legacy, this transition to market democracy and liberal democracy that broke some backlash and create a different path. Maybe it's not unique to the Czech Republic, but I do agree that was a forward-looking country. Your constitution was the first in the world to deny any privilege on the basis of sex in 1920. There was no other telling that. And I think there is no other telling that since in those terms. I see the other aspect is the fact that things come from up and not from the bottom, not from citizen mobilization in most cases, or within an organization, which might be an impediment too. Any other example? Thank you for sharing, Susanna. Any other example that you can think of, specific obstacles, things that maybe you think yourself are an obstacle to gender equality plan implementation? Yes, Susanna, please.
Yeah, coming from Sweden, I'm thinking of the problems or challenges that we have. What we can see is that there's quite large discussion around becoming a parent when you're an athlete and the conditions for that. I mean, in the ordinary position that you may have at the university, there's quite a lot of laws and regulations around parental leave, etc. But within sport, when you're practicing sport and you're an athlete, it becomes a challenge. And suddenly differences appear. That's just an example where we do have regulations and laws and things like that. But when we put it into the sports context, we have different rules or different norms and values coming in.
Yeah, definitely. And here it's pretty clear. It's disciplinary specifics due to the career of an athlete, due to its timing as well, due to the notion of performance, to the narrow window of opportunity for performance. You're a little bit frozen. Hopefully I'm not. I'm pausing. Check you hear me. Yes, you do hear me still. Okay, and you have definitely this in common. But again, history can matter, and the heritage in terms of how athletes' career, how coaching, how sport institution like state sport institution, for instance, are shaped can vary from a country to another. Again, state socialism is a big heritage in this field, although it changed a lot after 1990. There were a certain number of practices, notably with regard to gender, how gender differences are handled in sport, how women's sport are coached and are developed, which were definitely different in some Eastern European countries or Central Eastern European countries from the West in general. So that can matter. And I will give you a last example before we move forward, just like to keep you thinking about those differences. To be a post-conflict country is a specific context too, for instance, because you have certain notion of gender relation which have been shaped during the conflict, during the armed conflict, that can influence long-term the way gender roles are seen in society, and this can apply as well to universities. So all these aspects are things we have all to deal with, but we have all to deal with them differently based on where we are, whether we are in Sweden or whether we are in the Czech Republic or elsewhere in Europe will make definitely a difference. And that's why we need very concretely to be strategic. To be strategic based on all those potential challenges that we know can happen, resistances, lack of resources, lack of support, lack of stakeholders' engagement. We have to use our resources and our time wisely. We have to identify allies and to engage with them first. There are people who have an important role for your GEP, but they won't help you. There are maybe people who have a slightly less important role, but they are ready to help you. You can count on those first. You can also identify some levers for change and activate them. What does it mean? If there is a digitalization program running in your university, it can be an opportunity for putting gender data in, collecting more information, for instance. If there is a change in teaching program, which is not focused on introducing gender, it can be the opportunity to do it. This is what I mean by levers for change, or by windows of opportunity, which are pretty much the same. So it's important to invest where it matters the most, also in terms of your grounding action. What matters the most? What can create a spillover effect of change? Because there are some activities, some actions that are just standalone and one shot. And if they require a lot of resources, but they do not bring this spillover effect, this can be a waste of resource somehow. So since it is not easy, since it requires quite a lot of negotiation, let's be strategic and let's anticipate the next move that will allow you to create that impact. So it's being strategic, it just means that you know that things won't happen just because they are in a plan. We all know that it's not because you have a law that it is implemented. You need a certain number of steps to be taken and a certain number of people to be involved for the expected impact to actually materialize. And for that, indicators are needed. There will be surely a more in-depth discussion later on in Supporter about indicators, right? But just like to have this in mind. Having indicators, it's important, not just because you will fill in Excel sheet, which is long and boring, but because actually you can have a chance to measure whether you make a change, you make a difference or not. And if you don't, then you are a little bit wasting your time and your resources. And those indicators, they are better, we know they are better if they are what is called smart, that not only they are measurable, which is a little bit the point, but also they are relevant, they mean something. They are specific enough to actually measure something concrete. They are bound to time. You know, you should achieve this indicator by year 2 or year 3 or by this month, not whenever, because otherwise you will never measure anything. But they also need to be achievable, because if they are like just wishful thinking, it doesn't help much, because then you will realize that you failed to meet them and you will be demobilized and depressed. So better to fix indicators which are somehow achievable. What they help you to do is first, whether you are making a difference or not, through a grounding action, for instance. They help you to describe the changes or the events which are triggered by your gender equality plan implementation, that something has happened. But for that, you need first to be clear on what are your ultimate objective with your GEP, which kind of institution you want to bring about, and what you want to actually measure. Is it a change in ways of doing things? Is it a change in figures of women representation, for instance, in certain positions or certain disciplines? And you need also to set up evaluation question that you intend to answer. So you have different indicators. I won't belong on that because you will have other opportunities, as I said. But usually when we think of indicators, what we think of first are output indicators. For instance, we have an action about providing training to coaches. The training has been provided. This is an output indicator. Does it mean that the coaches will use this what they learned during the training? You don't know. Does it mean it will make a change in terms of how they handle situation of sexual harassment in sports setting? You don't know either, because this is about outcome and impact, midterm and long term. So having a look to these different indicators is also very important. Don't think only of output, a document published, a training delivered, a web page put online, but see of how much people do use the web page, how do they engage with the content in terms of comments. This is far more interesting than just delivering. And last thing I want to address before we move to the second focus, with a bit delay, but we will be on time altogether. I anticipated that. I've been strategic. We need to create an impact pathway. What do we mean by an impact pathway? It's just that you understand that you need a certain number of conditions for your gender equality plan or any sort of strategy to produce the anticipated outcome. You need a certain amount of pre-requirement to be met. So you put inputs, resources, knowledge, time into activities that are meant to deliver something that will produce outcome that will lead ultimately potentially to an impact. And for each of the part of this chain reaction to happen, a certain number of things are required, a certain number of assumptions, and certain number of anticipation. So you will receive the presentation, and I invite you to get more into the detail of what an impact pathway is, because it's just like anticipating what is going on around that will help me to move from activities, from action, to producing actually outcome and impact. So all of that you need to think carefully of. So before we move to focusing this strategic approach on addressing gender-based violence, notably through awareness raising, but also through setting up reporting mechanisms or protocols to tackle it, do you have any question, remark, or objection to what I have presented so far? We have a bit of time for it. How does it sound to be strategic?
Sounds very silent.
It sounds very silent, yeah. Yes, Susanne.
Yeah, I'm thinking of what you just said about the impact, and if you can actually come to the point where you have created a kind of even number of male and female decision makers, etc. I'm just wondering, in terms of time, what is how impatient or eager should we be to actually be able to measure an impact? Could you reason about that or comment?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a difficult one because it depends. When it's about figures, because it depends how much control you have on the situation. If nominating academics in certain decision-making or senior position is involving a number of factors, including the state or the Ministry of Higher Education, state regulation or regional regulation, your Senate, your executive board, your scientific committee, whatever, the more people are involved, the more regulated it is, the longer the time for producing impact, because you do not handle the full situation yourself. When it's about changing a practice, a specific practice on the ground, on the field, for instance, in terms of teaching content for sport education to integrate a gender sensitivity, you can change your, I mean, it's not easy, but you can change your teaching framework quite quick, and you can measure impact in how students relate to those issues after a couple of years. You survey them and you see there is a difference with the situation ex ante. So impatience degree should depend on the overarching goal. That's why it's important to know what your objective is and what you want to change. If it's just changing a practice or a document, you can measure change pretty quickly. If it's about changing big numbers in something that you do not control fully, it can vastly outtime your GEP duration, but still you have to work on it. Any other question? No? Okay, so let's move to this focus. This time also with the help of Nathalie, on gender-based violence and the broader context of sexual harassment and inappropriate behaviors. As you will remember, because I know you've been familiarized quickly with it, the UNICEF project, which is now the Gender Safe project, through its continuation, that's been launched in March, has developed what is called the 7P approach, or 7Ps model. The 7Ps refer to measuring prevalence of gender-based violence in all its form in university settings, to know a little bit about the figures, the state of play of these behaviors within university settings. What UNICEF told us through a big survey throughout 46 universities across the European Union is that about 53% of students are exposed to some form of gender-based violence during their study. So a majority of them, and the figures is higher obviously for women. It is also based on the notion of prevention. This we all understand. Of protection, which is often more difficult because protection also involves to connect with the state services or with the judiciary in some circumstances. The provision of services, legal support, psychological or health support, study support to potential victims, but also to partnerships and policies. Partnerships means that you have to bring some resources which are not available to your university, NGOs, specialized bodies of professionals dealing with gender-based violence, and also the notion of developing a policy framework to organize this reference to all aspects, including, of course, prosecution when things are brought, are investigated and prosecuted either internally by disciplinary bodies or externally by the judiciary. So this is our framework. But I will let maybe Nathalie to present the step-by-step guide. Nathalie?
Yes, thank you. I was muted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maxime. So yes, UNICEF is a project that was carried out until last year, or this January, and as Maxime said, is now in a way continuing to function as a gender safe. And in UNICEF, a number of tools and capacity building material were developed to really support universities and research organizations to better address gender-based violence. So in all these elements that Maxime just presented. And one of these elements is prevention. And back. Thank you. Sorry. One important aspect is in terms of prevention is to raise awareness on different forms of violence and the continuum of violence. So it can start with a very an incident that is seen as minor, but then lead to a form of sexual harassment and even sexual violence. And so one of the guide that was developed is this UNICEF step-by-step guide for awareness raising campaign on specifically gender-based violence. And this is one of the grounding action that you have, actions, one action on really sharing knowledge on sexual harassment and gender-based violence in sport or environment, and in particular raising awareness about this phenomena. I will not present the content of the guide now because we have no time, but you will see in the slides you receive that all the different steps are then explained in the slide and in fact also in the guide. So now just quickly to present you these three main phases for the Raising Awareness campaign, because that's also something we would like you to work together after this presentation. The first phase is to create your campaign. And that's in fact is, you know, really getting the relevant people in your working group. So as we have for the GEP, we have some core group that is, we have the group that can then help and support the implementation. That's the same for the campaign on gender, on raising awareness. You perhaps will need your communication officer, but you also will need representative of students or staff if you want your campaign to reach certain objectives. You have also to make them clear. What are the results? Who I'm addressing it to? So who are the groups I want to inform? Do I inform mainly the victims, you know, that they will know where to go? Do I also want to carry on the message to perpetrators that we will pursue them, we will not tolerate this type of behavior, there will be disciplinary measures? Do I want to carry message also to bystanders, so the people within the university that can witness some incident, and so give them the capacity to act? So it's all these steps that are explained in this first step, really. How do I frame my message to be sure that I reach, in fact, my objective that I need to be clear about, and what I expect as a result? Then you will launch your campaign, and to launch your campaign, you will see what are the different channels you want to use. You will perhaps develop a press release. Will you use this press release only internally, or you will also, you know, use your partnership so your partners also outside of the university or the faculty to pass on the message of this campaign, so that people around who perhaps will receive some victims know also what is the policy within the university, and get the message that they will be supported. So you will perhaps organize events with others, disseminate the campaign, and there, as also Maxime mentioned, there is potentially, you know, looking at windows of opportunity. So do you use specific dates that are linked to gender-based violence? Do you use also perhaps some sports event? I mean, will you do something around, you know, the Olympic game, or any type of activity, sports activity you have in your country, region, or faculty? And then finally, the third phase will be the evaluation. Indeed, this is part of the implementation, as the message was already conveyed by Maxime. You have to make sure that you get within your campaign, that you give yourself the matrix, the data that will allow you to gather information about the success of your campaign. If you want to inform the students about, you know, what are the mechanisms to support them, okay, then perhaps you will do something to measure this information, the knowledge gained by them in terms of where to go and what type of support they can get. And finally, I would like to say that, as we said, I mean, on gender-based violence, it's important to have a holistic view. And so to think here also beyond the campaign, and have that as part of all your efforts for gender-based violence. So really make sure that this is just, it is not just one of type of action. And now I think I will give you the floor, Maxime.
Yeah, no, just to remind that that gender-based violence is, of course, a complex issue, because it encompasses a number of different behaviors, of different reach and impact on people. And if you decide to run an awareness raising campaign, as several of you did through their grounding action, you have to understand it's just one step towards addressing the issue. Because raising awareness does not change by per se the behaviors. It does not change also the way your response mechanism are organized within your university to deal with those situations. So here you have like a few examples, and you will have the link to in different languages to actual awareness raising campaign in sport, education institution or in sport in general ecosystem that were launched in different countries, that showing that it works and that it brings some impact, but that just a piece of something broader. And if we get back to UNICEF production, you have the download link here to other documents, guiding documents that allow you to integrate this awareness raising effort, into a broader policy framework. In this case, no need to get into it because it's very similar to the different step of designing a gender equality plan, except that it is focused primarily on dealing with gender-based violence. But there is also a guideline which is perhaps more relevant to you, which is about developing a protocol for addressing gender-based violence. And I would like just to mention briefly what it is about. UNICEF defines a protocol on gender-based violence as a document that prescribes what will happen when a case of inappropriate behavior is reported in your university. And it's a very important tool because it's about connecting the dots between different instruments that already exist, like disciplinary committees, potential reporting procedures, ethical code of conduct that your university already probably adopted. But each of those elements does not provide for a quick reaction process. So the protocol is about connecting the dots of what exists and also complementing what exists by the missing element. So the main component of a protocol, it's about defining what is the scope, which type of behaviors will be dealt with by your process. It's defining how to report a case and to whom, which kind of protective and precautionary actions will be taken as soon as the situation is reported, obviously with a victim-centered approach. These protection measure, precautionary actions, they are not meant to be neither definitive nor based on investigation. It's just to make sure that nothing more potentially happen that would be harmful. It's about defining what would be the investigation procedures, in particular internally to your organization, the role of a potential disciplinary committee, the scope of the potential sanction, but also, and that's really important from the beginning, how your institution will communicate about this process. And from experience, I can tell you that this is often where our universities fail. The communication is really bad. So there is like a lot of communication and supposition on social media, for instance. The institution communicate too late, not from the right angle, not from a victim-centered approach that creates like reaction, and so on and so forth. And it's important also to include everything here, including the presumption also of innocence for potential perpetrators and the respect of a high degree of confidentiality. So communication will be really important. And what is also important is that to connect the dots, you necessarily need to define specifically what will be the roles and how involved stakeholders will collaborate with each other. And that's very often too a weak point. People do not know exactly what is their part to play in this protocol. So if some play their part and others don't, the protocol does not work well. So having such a protocol allow you to realize that you have a certain number of things already in place. Ethical committee, most likely, code of conduct, values of your university, which are supposedly inclusive, disciplinary committees, but you need to review how those elements will work with each other. And you will certainly also detect that there are gaps, and those gaps have to be filled as part of your gender equality plan. So definitely here you have some like useful guidelines that you can actually activate to support your reflection on this. But we are not in the break yet. We have time also for discussing this broader thing, and I will let the floor to Angela. Please go ahead, Angela.
Thanks a lot, Maxime. I just wanted to add regarding the protocol, or for example, in our case at the University of Banja Luka, it's the guidelines for prevention, that the catch is whenever you speak with someone who thinks about the case or whether he or she might report something, sometimes people say, oh, but the procedure itself, it's slow. The second thing, how am I sure that my anonymity will be actually respected? The third thing is the fact that what happens next, you know, after the guidance. I mean, the guidelines have clear procedures in terms of what happens next and what happens with the perpetrator and so on and so forth. But the catch is that the process stops after the first, let's say, session with the victim and with the perpetrator. Nothing happens afterwards because usually the people withdraw. And the question is, sometimes it is expected also from the person responsible for the implementation of the guidelines to take further procedures, like going outside of the university towards the prosecutor's office and so on in terms of the legal procedures that are available according to the law here. But that doesn't happen because people withdraw from the process. And then there is this disbalance from the expectations on who should do what and the actual guidelines who say, okay, this is what the university can do. Everything else goes beyond the scope of the university and goes then towards the prosecutor's office. So there is always this dilemma, you know, how to explain to the people, especially when you are also promoting the guidelines, for example, and saying, okay, you have these procedures you can address and so on, but that doesn't happen that often. I had recently a call from one of the faculties, so it's not from the, so just to explain you my role, I'm actually the gender equality advisory board at the university level. And I got a call from one of the faculties that there is a situation that has the potential to develop further into sexual harassment because it already started. And the person who called me was one of the professors who didn't know what to do, whether to report or not to report, because the others, it's among the students. So the case is among the students, and the students who are being harassed by another student don't want to report, but they come and approach to the professor saying that they are afraid to be in the group with this student, but they still don't want to report. So it's really a kind of a sensitive situation in how to kind of deal with it, especially when you have the guidelines and, you know, sometimes it's really difficult to tackle all the issues. And then to promote that you have something, and people kind of expect that everything will be simply resolved. So these are just the dilemmas. I don't know if anyone had the similar cases or kind
it
of
sounds
wants to
all
share.
very familiar, Angela, all very familiar. Nathalie, you want to respond maybe?
Yes, wanted to say that indeed this is very familiar. This is also something that was discussed in UNICEF and will be further discussed in gender safe, because it's all this question, as you said, what do we do when we have no reporting that we can use as such? We know about the situation. And there are ways, in fact, and that was already discussed in UNICEF, and I think we will continue about, whether then you have a communication. I mean, that can be a window of opportunity to raise awareness on the fact that this type of behavior is formally forbidden part of, that there are ways to, in fact, convey the message without indeed disclosing the names of the victim, or because you can also say, okay, the professor can do something within his class, but that depends also about the type of class. If it's a small class, it can be problematic. So trying to find ways to convey the message without disclosing the names. Yeah, but there are also inspiring practices in the UNICEF toolkit. And yeah, please also have a look at the gender safe.
What I really soaked off your comment, Angela, is it's a lot about communication, but it's a lot about trust from potential victims into the system, trust about what's gonna happen next, and building this trust is not easy, and it's truly important, because if there is trust, there will be reporting, and there will be understanding that the university cannot do alone everything, but that it can do things. So one of the ways to build that trust, it's to convey immediately the message that the institution is caring about the situation, because it's not like an individual complaint. It's potentially a disruption of university community rules and life. It's something that is bad for the community, not only in terms of reputation, but in terms of how it lives on a daily basis. So conveying this message, oh, we care. We don't know what happened yet fully. We need more information, but we care, and we take that seriously immediately. This can go also with precautionary actions. Even if the reporting is not completely formal, there might be intermediate steps to take some precautionary action, to separate students if it happened between students, to make sure that the persons that feel unsafe can feel safe again. And then that will create trust for that person to potentially formally report. What we tend to have as a problem, and it's discussed everywhere in this case, it's a black and white situation. We need the person to report formally, to be ready to leave anonymity at some point of the process, and to understand it from the beginning. And if not, we cannot do anything. This is a problem. There are many things we can do even without full formal reporting, or with the person wanting to stay anonymous. And maybe it won't go to the prosecutor, but certainly there are steps that can be taken to build that trust in the system. Sophia, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the trust issue, if it's okay to. We did an analysis of the UNICEF material, and it showed of the survey of 42,000 respondents, and it showed that if those who had been victims of violence had trust in the institutions, then the consequences of the event were less severe, but only for staff, not for students. So trust is a moderator here, that the more trust, the less you report negative consequences of the event. So just underlining the importance of trust, but only for staff, not for students. Trust did not have an effect on students.
And also because trust is more difficult to build with students as well, due to the relation to the institution. So it's it's a complex issue, but you see that having a protocol and review it carefully can help you to connect the dots and prevent those gaps from impeding action. Nathalie, last word before we go on break.
Yeah, in fact, before we go on break, I wanted just to see whether you would agree to take a group picture. So if all of you can put their camera on, and then Ines will take a picture.
And maybe
Yeah.